Hey, my name is Chris Brennan, and this is your horoscope for Leo and Leo rising for the entire year ahead of 2021. So, this is primarily for those that have their ascendant in the sign of Leo, but it can also apply to those of you that have your sun sign in Leo or your moon sign in that sign as well. But rising sign is preferred because it's going to be more accurate in terms of your birth chart. All right, so let's jump right into it. So, this is the planetary movements calendar, which shows where the planets will start in the signs of the zodiac at the beginning of the year and how far through the signs of the zodiac they'll get by the end of the year. In terms of the major transits that I want to focus on in 2021 for you, we're going to focus primarily on outer planet transits. The major one, of course, is that Saturn and Jupiter have recently moved into Aquarius, which is your seventh house of relationships. So that's where the Great Conjunction occurred in December of 2020. But that Great Conjunction is actually inaugurating a longer term period that's going to be relevant for you in terms of relationships, in terms of Jupiter for the next 12 months. And in terms of Saturn, actually, this is the start of a 3-year transit of that planet through that sector of your chart. So, as I said, the seventh house has to do with relationships, which is both romantic relationships as well as platonic partnerships, like business partners or other one-on-one relationships in your life. It can also pertain to the marriage partner or just to other people in your life in general. So, Saturn transiting into your seventh house can sometimes indicate a period in which the topic of relationships just becomes more serious and more heavy for some reason over the course of the next 3 years. So you should have gotten a preview of what that will be about in the, the second quarter of 2020, when Saturn first dipped into Aquarius between late March and I believe it was late June of 2020. Saturn went into the first degree or two of Aquarius, and that could have been a bit of a preview of you for some of the themes that may come up in relationships over the course of the next few years. So, of course, I should caution that that was probably a little bit more problematic, or there was a bit more strife during that because Mars went into Aquarius at the same time with Saturn. And that's not quite what you're dealing with here in 2021, because instead of Mars, Jupiter is going to be transiting through Aquarius with Saturn at the same time, which is more optimistic and more growth oriented. So Saturn transits through the seventh can be about consolidation, testing, current relationships. Sometimes you can experience disappointments or obstacles or setbacks when it comes to relationships during this time. But the good news is that any relationships that make it through this period will end up being ones that will be much stronger and will be probably more enduring than any other relationships that don't make it through that time. So even though that sounds a little bit challenging for relationships, the good news is that with Jupiter transiting through your seventh house also during the course of 2021, that's a much more optimistic transit that has to do with growth and expansion when it comes to relationships over the course of the next year. So you may find yourself starting some new relationships. You may find some relationships becoming more positive or receiving benefits through a relationship as a result of being in association with somebody, and just generally a sense of confirmation and stabilization to kind of balance out the more challenging indications of Saturn going through that sign over the course of 2021. So I think that that's good news. Of course, part of that shift is that Saturn has now departed from your sixth house of health and illness and work. So some of the heavy feelings that you've had surrounding that area of your life, whether it's been due to, sometimes it can be health issues that come up over the course of the past 3 years of Saturn transiting through your sixth house, can sometimes be alleviated now that Saturn has departed from that sign. In other instances, it can be problems at work or obstacles that came up at work since December of 2017 when Saturn first went into Capricorn and your sixth house that can now be alleviated or sort of recede into the background in some way. So that's one of the good parts about this year is there's a major shift and a definitive move away from some of the heavy transits that we were dealing with in 2020 and a little bit more optimistic of a shift coming up here in 2021. Let's see, other things that I meant to mention. Uranus, which has been transiting through Taurus, which is your 10th house of career over the course of the past couple of years, this is a long-term, like 7-year transit of Uranus through your 10th house of career and reputation and social standing, which can sometimes indicate major upsets or revolutions or unexpected changes, either upwards or downwards in terms of your career, like having a sudden shift into a new career that you didn't anticipate or going in a direction that seems very new and very unexpected for you. There's going to be some sort of tension this year between that transit of Uranus through your 10th house of career and the transit of Saturn through your 7th house of relationships. So it's like those two parts of your life, for some reason, are becoming more prominent, but there's also some sort of tension between them at the same time. This tension is going to peak 3 times this year, or should peak 3 times when those Saturn-Uranus squares go exact, which are in mid-February, in mid-June, and then later on in December of 2021. For any of you that have, this is going to be particularly important for any of you that have placements in fixed signs in your natal chart between 7 and 13 degrees of the fixed signs. And that's because Saturn and Uranus will complete those exact aspects between the first one is at 7 degrees of Aquarius to 7 degrees of Taurus. The second one in June is from 13 Aquarius to 13 Taurus. And then the third and final one is from 11 Aquarius to 11 Taurus. So any of you that have personal planets around that area should, I would think, especially feel the tension between that Saturn-Uranus square and some of the more challenges and difficulties and more conservative forces that are kind of holding you back or presenting obstacles or duties when it comes to relationships, versus the more liberatory feelings of Uranus going through your 10th house and sort of wanting to do your own thing or pursue your own life direction. And you may find yourself having to make a choice between those two areas, despite those two very distinct feelings between the house of relationships and the house of career over the course of the next 12 months. Some of that's going to be highlighted, especially when Mars goes through the fixed signs this year. So first in January, when Mars goes through Taurus, it's going to exactly square Saturn on January 13th, and then exactly conjoin Uranus on January 20th. So if you have planets around those degrees, again, it could really see an emphasizing, and that could see that acting as sort of a trigger to set into motion some of the events surrounding especially your 10th house of career and your 7th house of relationships. Mars sometimes can excite things into action and sometimes add additional energy, but sometimes it can be something that can cause irritability or coincide with irritability, or even things that can boil over into strife or conflict in some way. So in January, it's going to be transiting through your 10th house of career, so that's localizing it to that specific area of your life. Other times, Mars is going to hit Saturn and Uranus again in July, which is when it's transiting through the tropical sign of Leo, which is your rising sign or first house, indicating both your mind as well as your body. And then finally, when Mars goes through Scorpio later in the year, it's going to hit Saturn and Uranus again, November 10th and November 17th. And Scorpio is your 4th house of your home and living situation. So I'm bringing some of those transits up just because it might indicate periods during the course of the year where you reach a critical turning point, and things might be tense during that time, but some of those tensions may lead to growth and development and pushing you in directions that you wouldn't have gone otherwise if you didn't get that sudden, somewhat strong, in some instances, push to go in one direction or another. All right, so besides those transits, I also wanted to mention the eclipses this year. We've got 4 eclipses taking place during the course of 2021, and these are going to take place in your 11th house of friends, your 5th house of creativity, children, and sexual expression, and finally your 10th house of career. Here's the dates for some of those eclipses. So lunar eclipse in Sagittarius, May 26th, a solar eclipse in Gemini, June 10th, the Taurus partial lunar eclipse on November 19th, and then finally a solar eclipse in Sagittarius on December 4th. So let's pull those back up. The Gemini eclipse happening in your 11th house of friends and groups this year is going to be about great beginnings and great endings when it comes to friends and groups and alliances. So, on the one hand, you may find different parts of the year where you're suddenly being more social, and you may find yourself starting new friendships that end up being significant in your life in some way. But at the same time, there may be certain points when you find yourself winding down or closing or bringing to an end some relationships or some friendships specifically that had been significant in your life up to this time. So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect is with some of the eclipses taking place in your fifth house of children. There's some of you where there's going to be great beginnings potentially, as well as great turning points when it comes to the topic of children in your life. So for some people, this could be like having children. For others, it could be if you have already children, they could be reaching an important part of their life where there's some significant developments in their life that are relevant to you. And also for some people, the fifth house can represent creativity and self-expression. So any of you with an artistic bent, this could be an important turning point for you artistically in starting or ending new projects. And it also can sometimes relate to sex and sexuality and new beginnings and new endings in terms of exploring that side of your life in more detail and having it become more relevant in some concrete way for you. So those are the two main eclipses, and those are going to be a continuation of themes that already started in 2020 when we first started having eclipses occur in those two signs. So while the themes are beginnings and endings, it's probably trends that you've already started to see come up in your life at this point, and you'll just see a continuation of that over the course of 2021. The other eclipse that takes place is the one that is in Taurus, which is a lunar eclipse in Taurus on November 19th, and that's happening in your 10th house of career. So because that's a lunar eclipse, that should indicate some sort of culmination or something that's coming to fruition in the area of your career and your overall life direction towards the end of 2021. And that's actually going to open up a whole sequence of eclipses that is going to take place in 2022, where it's going to bounce back and forth between your 10th house of your career and your public life versus your 4th house in Scorpio, which is your home, your family, your living situation, and your private life. So we just get a little bit of a hint of that at the very end of 2021 with this Taurus eclipse that takes place really quickly in November. But I wanted to mention it because that's another one of those things where it's going to start pushing you in a direction where you're going to start experiencing some major beginnings and major endings when it comes to career matters. And that's going to really lead into some much more significant themes that you'll encounter during the course of 2022. And the later part of 2021 is just kind of a preview of that, or a segue into that new chapter of your life. So pay attention to that one. All right, the last thing that I wanted to mention is just Jupiter's ingress into the sign of Pisces, which occurs in December of 2021. So here we can see Jupiter moves into Pisces on the 28th of December 2021, and this is moving into your 8th house, which is the house traditionally that has to do with things like mortality, things like inheritance, but also broader themes that I've found to be very relevant of other people's money and possessions that belong to other people in your life in general, which can sometimes include things like taxes or debts. So Jupiter transiting into your 8th house could be a period which could be good for financial issues, and in which you either, if you have a partner, you could see your partner's finances increase and start to expand or stabilize in some way, or in which you might receive money from other people where, for some reason, other people's finances start to benefit you in some way, in some personal capacity. So growth and expansion in the sphere of other people's money is what's indicated by that Jupiter transit. So even though that doesn't start until very late in December of 2021, I wanted to mention it because there's actually a preview period of what that transit's going to be about for you that's going to occur between May of 2021 and July of 2021, when Jupiter dips into Pisces for just a few months. So we can see it going into Pisces on the 13th of May and going into your 8th house. We see Jupiter station retrograde on the 20th of June, right there on the solstice. So it stations at, I think, like 1 degree of Pisces. And then Jupiter retrogrades out and goes back into Aquarius and back into your seventh house of relationships on July 28th. So it's just a really quick couple month preview period, but it's important because anything that comes up during that time that has to do with your eighth house and issues of mortality or other people's money is actually going to become much more important in 2022 when Jupiter spends a much larger part of the year transiting through that sign and through that sector of your chart. So pay attention to that preview period during the second quarter of 2021. All right, I think that's it in terms of the main things that I wanted to focus on for this year ahead forecast for Leo and Leo rising. So good luck during the course of 2021, and I will see you again next year to record the horoscopes for 2022. So have a good year, and I'll see you again next time. Many of the images and calendars that were used in this episode are now available as posters on the astrologypodcast.com website. This includes our 2021 Planetary Alignments calendar, which shows all of the ingresses and retrogrades and lunations this year, the Planetary Movements calendar, which shows how far through the signs of the zodiac each of the planets will get during the course of 2021, and also other posters that we have, like our significations of the 12 houses poster, so that you can personalize and understand how each of these transits relates to your own birth chart. We also recently released our 2021 Auspicious Elections Full Year Ahead Electional Astrology Report, where Lisa Scheim and I went through each of the next 12 months and we picked out one lucky date, which would be good for launching new ventures and undertakings using the principles of electional astrology. So you can find out more about that report at chrisbrennanastrologer.com. Thanks to all the patrons that supported the production of this episode of the podcast through our page on Patreon. In particular, thanks to the patrons on our producers tier, including Nate Craddock, Marin Altman, Thomas Miller, Catherine Conroy, Michelle Marilot, Christy Moe, Ariana Amor, Mandy Ray, Angelique Nambo, Sumo Kopic, and Nadia Habhab. For more information about how to become a patron or have your name listed in the credits, please visit patreon.com/astrologypodcast. Also, special thanks to our sponsors, including the Northwest Astrological Conference, which is happening online May 27th through the 31st, 2021. Find out more information at norwac.net. The Mountain Astrologer magazine, which you can find out more information about at mountainastrologer.com. The ISAR Astrology Conference, happening August 18th through the 22nd, 2021. More information at isar2020.org. The Honeycomb Collective Personal Astrological Almanacs, which you can find out more information about at honeycomb.co. Also, the Portland School of Astrology, more information at portlandastrology.org. The AstroGold Astrology app, available for both iPhone and Android, available at astrogold.io. And finally, the primary software program that we use on episodes of the Astrology Podcast is called SolarFire Astrology Software, which is available at alabe.com, and you can get a 15% discount with the promo code AP15.